And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is December the 1st, 335th day of the year. Just 30 days remain to the year is over with, and we get to start a new one. Holidays observances. It's Walt Disney Day. Binge some favorite childhood movies, plan a trip to the Magic Kingdom, enjoy some Disney-themed activities. It's National Cookie Cutter Day. Wear a dress day, preferably for the females of the species, but there you go. National Christmas Lights Day. National Eat a Red Apple Day. National Women Support Women Day. National Twin with Your Dog Day. Create adorable twinning moments with your furry friend. Christmas Book Day. Discovering joy in festive tales. Sharing Christmas books. Day Without Art Day. National Peppermint Bark Day. Prisoners for Peace Day. Antarctica Day. Rosa Parks Day. Yes, this particular day celebrates Rosa Parks when Americans pause to remember the life and legacy of this interesting woman. Day reflects on Rosa Parks' selfless work during America's civil rights movement, known for her short stature and strong will. May she ever be remembered for her efforts. Yeah, she's the one, when told to move to the back of the bus, said not just no, but hell no. Well, let's see. My system just went odd again. It's World AIDS Day. Don a red ribbon to raise awareness of this prevalent condition. Counter misinformation and stigma and donate to education and research efforts. Bifocals at the Monitor Liberation Day. Romania National Day. Cyber Monday. Freedom and Democracy Day in Chad. Zagreb Advent goes on to January the 7th. It's a magical celebration that transformed Croatia's capital into a winter wonderland. Streets light up with festive decorations and create a warm and inviting and very festive event. National Deal Week. National Cookie Cutter Week. Crohn's and Colitis Awareness Week. Advent. Artes Mundi. National Influenza Vaccination Week. Older Driver Safety Awareness Week. Inclusive Schools Week. Hornbill Festival. It is a festival that's a vibrant celebration that brings together various tribes in Nagaland, India. It's a colorful event, showcases traditional music and dance and art and the rich culture and heritage of the Naga people. Okay. And, of course, we still have Blue Christmas, which will go on through the end of the month. Famous people born on this date: Zoe Kravitz, Richard Pryor, and Sarah Silverman. Well, on that particular note, let us see what stories we have in the news. And maybe, there we go, my system will decide it's going to work this morning. Well, one more time. Well, there's a special election coming up in Nashville, Tennessee, Music Land. It's an unusually contentious election. We're going to know Wednesday morning if a special election in Tennessee is a referendum on country music, pedal taverns, and bachelorettes. Or if we can divine a deeper political meaning from the results of this special election in Tennessee's 7th Congressional District. may give us some indication of what the future is going to bring. Democrat Afton Ben is trying to tip the scales in favor of her party in a district which President Trump carried by about 20 points. And former Representative Mark Green, Republican of Tennessee, won by a similar percentage last fall. She faces a GOP Matt Van Epps in what's actually a Republican district. But political observers are watching the race to try to gauge potential weakness by President Trump, a softness in the Trump coalition, and maybe some issues with the Republican brand, or maybe an early indication of maybe a blue wave in the 2026 midterms. I don't think there's going to be one, but that's just me. Well, President Trump gave Maduro an ultimatum to flee Venezuela as land operations loom on the horizon. He delivered a stern ultimatum to Nicolas Maduro to leave Venezuela immediately, before announcing the country's airspace should be closed down, according to a report. Story in the Miami Herald. Washington's warning was delivered in a phone call with Caracas and offered guaranteed evacuation for Maduro, his wife, Celia Flores, and her son, but only if the dictator agreed to resign on the spot. Well, the conversation stalled, as you might guess. Within hours, Washington escalated dramatically. The ensuing impasse, source told the outlet, was over Maduro asking for global amnesty for any crimes he and his group had committed, and that particular request was rejected. Well, Mandami appointed a New York City professor who wrote a book on ending policing, now tasked with shaping the community safety. Sociology professor at Brooklyn College, appointed to New York Mayor-elect Zohn Mandami's transition team, wrote a book about ending policing. He says, I'm excited to announce that I've been asked to join the Mandami transition team to work on community safety issues. According to Alex Vitale, this is a new era for New York City. Yes, if it's any better than the old era, it'll be a miracle. Well, an advocate warned an Afghan evacuee was not functional as a person months before the National Guard shooting. The Afghan man accused of shooting 2 National Guard members last week had been mentally declining for years, according to emails reviewed by the Associated Press. Detailed long stretches of isolation, escalating instability, and sudden cross-country trips that preceded the attack blocks from the White House. The AP reported the 29-year-old Lockenwall had drawn concern for months from those that knew him, with interviews and records showing him dropping out of work and slipping into long periods of silence and taking abrupt road trips ahead of the shooting. One email cited by the AP warned that he had not been functional as a person, a father, and a provider since March of last year. He quit his job, shut himself in a darkened room for days, and stopped responding even to his wife and older children. And the email showed that an advocate feared he might harm himself, but said they didn't see any signs suggesting he might become violent toward others. If you remember, he crossed the country to shoot the 2 National Guard members. Well, a warrior from a long-lost ancient civilization is deemed high status, found with rare treasures. The tomb of an ancient warrior buried about 1,300 years ago by a long-forgotten people. The King St. Stephen Museum, located in Hungary, announced the discovery on Facebook. The tomb belonged to a high-ranking Avar period warrior, according to the translated post. The Avars were a nomadic people from Central Asia who settled parts of what's now Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, Serbia, and Austria during the early Middle Ages. Once dominant across Central and Southern Europe, their power weakened after Charlemagne's campaigns. And the burial of this warrior, less than 7 feet deep, dates between 670 and 690 A.D. during the Middle Avar period. Found in August, though officials only revealed the discovery in October. Said the body appeared to have been disturbed at some point, as the warrior's head, chest, and abdomen had been moved from their anatomical positions. Well, A Muslim father and his two sons drowned a teen daughter over her Western lifestyle and the fact she refused to wear the headscarf. Excuse me. Dutch prosecutors demanded Friday a Muslim father and the two sons face up to 25 years in prison for allegedly drowning a 18-year-old family member. They did it because they believed her Western behavior was bringing shame to the family. The body of Syrian woman Arian al-Nohar was found submerged in a lake with heads and feet bound tightly on May 28th of last year. Happened near Juri in northern Netherlands 6 days after disappearing, according to authorities. Officials arrested her father and two brothers, then aged 22 and 24, and charged them in connection with the killing, which prosecutors said likely happened on May 22nd. Apparently, the three saw her as a burden that had to be removed, according to the Public Prosecution Service, just because she's a young woman who wanted to live her own life her own way. Authorities said her male relatives, who came from what they described as a strict Islamic family, allegedly killed her after believing she was behaving too Western in the eyes of her family. She was targeted for refusing to wear a headscarf in public-like settings. The immediate cause of her death appeared to be a live video on TikTok, which showed her without a headscarf and wearing makeup, according to prosecutors. The video apparently embarrassed the family, according to their post, which didn't fit with their traditional views. So they killed her in what clearly was an honor killing. Well, George Clooney's revealed years of resentment after Brad Pitt beat him for a Thelma and Louise role. He reflected on how he felt about losing this pivotal role to Brad Pitt in the earlier years of his career. In a recent interview with The Times, the 64-year-old actor revealed that once he came close to landing the role of J.D., the charming drifter played by Brad Pitt in the 1991 classic Thelma and Louise. He said, I got the final test for a role in that picture, and Brad Pitt got it. The role of J.D. became Pitt's breakout performance and turned him into a movie star almost overnight, while Clooney at the time was still best known for television work. The Thelma and Louise sheltered housewife, Thelma Dixon, played by Gina Davis, and her best friend, independent waitress Louise Sawyer, played by Susan Sarandon, first encountered J.D. at a roadside motel after fleeing the scene of a crime. And Thelma, who's unhappily married to the controlling Daryl, who was played by Christopher McDonald, seduced and betrayed by J.D., triggering a series of events that lead to the movie's iconic ending. It became both a critical and commercial hit, and the role of J.D. launched Brad Pitt into stardom. Meanwhile, Clooney became a household name for a few years later when he played Dr. Doug Ross in the hit television series ER. But Clooney admitted he struggled with the resentment for years after Pitt was cast as J.D. Told The Times he was especially frustrated at the time because he believed he could have made his breakthrough into the movies if he'd have landed that role. Well, new cancer therapy hunts and destroys the deadly tumors in the major breakthrough study. Scientists at UCLA have developed an off-the-shelf cell-based immunotherapy, which is able to track down and kill pancreatic cancer cells even after they'd spread to other organs. In a study involving mice, the treatment slowed cancer growth, extended survival, and remained effective even within the harsh environment of solid tumors. Even when the cancer tries to evade one attack pathway by changing its molecular signature, our therapy is hitting it from multiple other angles at the same time. The tumor simply can't adapt fast enough. That's according to a postdoctoral scholar at UCLA. And maybe it can work. Well, NFL fans debate whether Texans kicker made a crucial extra point in the win over the Colts. The Houston Texans pulled off a 4-point win over Indianapolis Colts on Sunday. It's 20-16 as fans debated whether kicker Kami Firebaum successfully made an extra point. The debate started after Texans wide receiver Nico Collins ran the ball 7 yards for a touchdown in the fourth quarter. Fairbairn came into the game in an attempt to make the extra point. He kicked the ball and appeared as though it may have missed it wide to the left. But NFL officials said the kick was good, sparked a debate on social media over whether the officials made the correct call. Well, there's a lot of Cyber Monday deals going on right now. You can get up to 70% off some Apple tech, off Levi's denim and more. Well, a beauty influencer was found dead in a suitcase in the forest after ex-boyfriend allegedly confesses to killing her. Stephanie Piper was reportedly found dead after her body was discovered inside a suitcase in the Slovene forest after an alleged confession from her ex-boyfriend. 31-year-old Austrian influencer known for her makeup, fashion, and singing content on social media went missing after coming back home from a Christmas party last Sunday, November 23rd. That's according to Styrian State Police. Her ex-boyfriend allegedly admitted to strangling her, hiding her body in a suitcase, and burying it in the forest. Later led authorities to the body, according to a major Austrian newspaper. After that Christmas party, Piper allegedly messaged a friend saying she had arrived home safely, but soon sent another message saying she thought somebody was in her stairwell. Her neighbors said they heard arguing and allegedly saw her ex-boyfriend in the building. People magazine cited local outlets, including OE24 and 20 Minuten and Klein Zeitung. Relatives and co-workers weren't able to reach her, and she failed to show up for work. They reported her missing, according to the police. And her 31-year-old boyfriend was subsequently arrested in Slovenia after he was found near his burning car, which investigators noted they were unable to. When investigators noted they were not able to contact him. People these days are killing for the strangest reasons. Well, the head of an ICE operation, a New Orleans police leader, has been lambasted for comments about enforcement of immigration law. New Orleans Police Department Superintendent Ann Kirkpatrick made waves earlier this week when she stated illegal immigration by foreign nationals in the U.S. was a civil issue, and therefore her agency will not enforce certain immigration laws, but would respond when ensuring public safety and those involved in the federal operation were not going to get hurt. Kirkpatrick made the remarks at a press conference marking the end of a 15-year consent decree between the city and the federal government. And then Mayor Mitch LaDrew invited the Obama Justice Department to probe the agency for alleged pattern or practice of civil rights related misconduct. During the press conference, Kirkpatrick responded to one reporter by saying, to be in the country undocumented is a civil issue. It is not criminal by any means. And we're not going to enforce civil law, she said. So our support's to make sure we're not going to get hurt and our community's not in danger. Well, this selective enforcement of the law is becoming quite the issue. Well, War Secretary Pete Hegseth has shared a meme of a children's book character firing on narco-terrorist drug boats. As the Trump administration conducts deadly strikes against alleged drug boats of narco-terrorists, War Secretary Pete Hegseth has posted a meme depicting the children's book series character Franklin firing a weapon at a vessel like that. And he joked, for your Christmas wish list when sharing the fake book cover. The meme shows the turtle character in a helicopter firing what appears to be an RPG at one of the boats in the water below. The RPG fired by Franklin flies toward the boat where there's already an explosion occurring. Hegseth is certainly doubling down on his stance. Well, Melania Trump, First Lady, decorates the White House for Christmas. She said, "Home is where the heart is." The White House is officially decorated for Christmas with a decor and a theme personally selected by the First Lady to celebrate the holiday season. This is the fifth time Trump has had the opportunity to decorate 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue for the Christmas season. And this year, the First Lady's decor highlights the American spirit of generosity, patriotism, and gratitude. Trump's decked the halls of the White House this season with more than 25,000 feet of ribbon, more than 2,000 strands of light, more than 120 pounds of gingerbread, more than 2,800 gold stars, and more than 10,000 blue butterflies, and more than 700 feet of garland. And according to the White House, every detail of the 2025 White House Christmas decorations was personally selected by Ms. Trump to honor the heart of America, and the theme, home is where the heart is. White House has 51 Christmas trees and 75 of Trump's signature Christmas wreaths. There'll be some classic red bows and hang outside the windows of the White House. Well, a doctor is warned of two simple food mistakes that increase the chronic disease risk. Nutrition can be the key to warding off disease, even devastating conditions like cancer, according to a release. That's according to doctors such as Dr. Frank Dumont, an internal medicine physician and executive medical director of Verta Health, a Colorado-based group that tackles metabolic health through diet. In an on-camera interview with Fox News, he said that Americans have experienced an increase in obesity, diabetes, autoimmune disease, and cancers in the last several decades. Probably has a lot to do with our lifestyle. We know food's a big part of that. Our diet has changed dramatically over the past few decades, he said. And a lot of the foods we're eating are more processed and much higher in simple carbohydrates and simple sugars than ever were before. And these foods have been linked to an increase in insulin and inflammation, which leads to health complications. And to lower the risk of chronic disease, he encouraged people to make a few simple swaps. Depends on the individual situation, they said. Choose real fruit over fruit juice and opt out of breaded chicken. Well, you need to check if your password was stolen in a huge leak. If you haven't checked your credentials later, now's the time to do it, he said. Staggering 1.3 billion unique passwords and 2 billion unique email addresses surfaced online. The event's one of the largest exposure of stolen logins we've ever seen. It's not the result of one major breach. Instead, Cynthian, a threat intelligence firm, searched the open and dark web for leaked credentials. You might remember this company from its early discovery of 183 million exposed email accounts. Well, this time the scale is a lot larger. And Landman star Andy Garcia says Maverick Taylor Sheridan is a refreshing approach to Hollywood. Says audience are drawn to help Taylor Sheridan's TV universe for its refreshing realism. Garcia, who plays cartel boss Galino in the second season of the Paramount show Landman, praised Sheridan as one of Hollywood's true mavericks. Well, I think, and one final story. An 8-year-old's among 4 killed in a California family gathering shooting as a gunman still remains at large. 4 people were killed and 11 others were wounded Saturday evening when gunfire erupted at a family gathering in Stockton, California. San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office said 15 people in total suffered gunshot wounds and were confirmed the victims who died were 8, 9, 14, and 21. Detectives remained at the scene processing evidence with support from the California Department of Justice. That's an interesting phrase, California Department of Justice. Well, on that note, let's talk about our main story for today. Well, this story we're going to talk about today, I heard about years ago when I was in my criminal justice degree. It was called the deep freeze murder of Ann Noblett. According to the Daily Mirror newspaper, it's one of the most sinister crimes of the century. Even if it had been fiction, it would have been deemed too diabolical. Well, the young lady in question, Ann Teresa Noblett, was a 17-year-old, quiet, home-loving girl, daughter of a wealthy poultry farmer turned motorcycle helmet entrepreneur, been privately educated at the Châtellard School near Chateau du Châtellard in Montreux, Switzerland. Spent 4 years living in Switzerland and returned to Hertfordshire in England in July of 1957. Friendless and, many said, slightly isolated. Now, she wasn't the prettiest of young women, average height, broad, slightly ungainly, and what might have been described back then as big-boned and handsome. Excuse me. Women could be handsome, but back in the day when it wasn't a term exclusively reserved for men, and it wasn't really a compliment. She attempted to make friends as she attended Watford Technical College, where she studied domestic science. Struck up one or two friendships with a couple of girls her own age. On Monday, the 30th of December, 1957, she took herself off to Lourdes Hall in Harpenden, where she attended dance classes for the latest musical craze of rock and roll. Dance class ended at 5:30 in the afternoon, and shortly after that, she'd boarded a number 391 Green Line bus. Got off the bus at 6 that evening in the village of Wheathampstead at the junction of Lower Lutton Road and Marshall's Heath Lane by the Cherry Tree Public House. Marshall's Heath Lane was an unlit, isolated country lane, and Ad's family home was about a quarter of a mile down it. Local girl by the name of Shirley Edwards passed by on a scooter and saw Ann walking up the Marshall's Heath Lane toward her home. Also noted in the distance there were the taillights of a stationary car. But when Ann didn't get home later that evening, her parents, Hugh and Ira, telephoned the police, and search of the surrounding area took place. Hedgerows, outhouses, sheds, and barns were all searched. And then the police turned to the community asking for help, and by the next day, 300 volunteers and soldiers from the local army base were combing the local countryside. Private gardens were searched, ponds and lakes were dug, and house-to-house inquiries were being undertaken. Police and three-man teams were sent out to search haystacks and ditches and isolated footpaths and copses. Extensive search turned up nothing. Detective Chief Superintendent Robert Elwell of the Hertfordshire Constabulary's Criminal Investigation Department took charge of the case. It became what DCS Elwell described as one of the most baffling cases in years. One of his first thoughts was that with Hugh Noblett being a successful and wealthy local businessman, Ann may have been kidnapped for ransom purposes. But when nobody contacted the Nobletts to issue any demands, the idea fizzled out to nothing. And with no leads, there was little DCSL could do. All that was to be done was carry on searching and making local inquiries and hope that she turned up alive and safe and well. Well, Shirley Edwards came forward and told the police about the car taillight she had seen on Marshall's Heath Lane on the night of Ann's disappearance. Now, cars were still a bit of a novelty in the late 1950s. Less than 14% of households owned a car back then, with only 4 million licensed vehicles on Britain's roads. That included every single bus and taxi and haulage vehicle. And so the police canvassed the local area and asked residents if they had seen any strange vehicles in the area. And several people came forward and reported a black car had been spotted in the area being driven by a middle-aged man wearing horn-rimmed spectacles. So an appeal was put out for this man to come forward and eliminate himself from the inquiry, but amazingly enough, he never did. On Friday, the 31st of January, 1958, leading aircraftman Hugh Simmons on leave from RAF Stanmore, 14-year-old brother Brian were walking their family dog, Rip, in Rose Grove Wood in Whitwell. Rip slipped his lead and went bounding off into the woods. Well, the two followed him as he left a well-known path and cut through the woods. They stopped dead in their tracks when they came across a grisly discovery. Ann Noblett lay in a patch of open scrubland about 7 miles from where she had last been seen alive. She was fully dressed, including her winter coat and her spectacles and her boots. Arms had been folded across her chest, and around her body were 30 shillings in coins, about 40 pounds to adjust for inflation. Deduced that these coins had been put around the body to prove that nothing had been stolen from her. The law on hanging had changed the year before. People could now only be hung for murder in certain specific circumstances, don't you know? At the time, sexually motivated murders were not a capital offense, but a murder in the furtherance of a theft was. It was believed the killer put the coins around the body to prove he hadn't robbed her. Therefore, he would have avoided the death penalty if he got caught. Well, the coins were sent away for forensic analysis, but not one single fingerprint was found on any of the coins. Well, DCS Elwell very carefully considered the area where the body was discovered. 75 yards into the interior of the woodland and 300 yards from the nearest vehicle access point. It wasn't possible for car to simply pull up at this spot and dump her with ease. Body would have had to have been manually carried to the point where it had been laid out. There was no signs of a disturbance in the undergrowth, indicated the body had been dragged to the site. Now, let's face it, folks, Ann was a large girl and weighed 11 stone. That's 154 pounds for American listeners. Now, would it have been possible for one man to carry such a heavy dead weight that far? Well, tests were carried out. While it was determined to be difficult, they proved it was possible for one single offender to have gotten the body to the isolated spot unaided. So the home office pathologist, Dr. Francis Camps, carried out an autopsy. She'd been raped and strangled. Killer had stripped her naked at some point before reclothing her post-mortem, and this was ascertained by the fact that her undergarments had been buttoned up incorrectly. She'd been murdered shortly after her disappearance, as the packed lunch her mother had made her on the day of her disappearance still sounded partially digested in her stomach. One of the most peculiar findings was just how cold her body was. She was actually frozen solid. Been a mild winter with very little frost or temperature low enough to explain the frozen nature of the body. And to be doubly sure, the meteorological office was contacted and an official list of temperatures for the period she had been missing was obtained. And these confirmed it had been an unusually mild winter and the temperature hadn't dropped below freezing since she disappeared. So Dr. Camps concluded from this evidence she'd been stripped naked and stored in a freezer after she'd been murdered. But with the body having been frozen and therefore time of death couldn't be possible to ascertain, DCSU wondered how long the body had been lying out undiscovered in the woodland. Rose Grove Wood had been searched by police sniffer dogs on New Year's Day and again by a civilian search team a few days later. A botanist from Ropstead Agriculture Experimental Station was consulted. They examined the ground surrounding and under the body, looking for differences in growth of the fern and the snowdrops, and they concluded the body had been lying out in the woodland clearing for about 2 weeks. That meant that the body had been placed in the woodland on around Friday the 17th of January, 1958. So could it have been that the house-to-house inquiries had spooked the killer and forced him to move the body? It was certainly a strong possibility. Now, the police didn't have any clues to go on. No forensic evidence, no eyewitness testimony of any use. Didn't have any spurned lovers or boyfriends or even any enemies anybody knew about. So the case was hitting a dead end. Scotland Yard was asked for their assistance. Detective Superintendent Richard Lewis was dispatched. And Detective Superintendent Lewis felt the freezing of the body had to be the best lead the police had. This was the 50s, and fridges and freezers weren't the household item they are today. In fact, they were few and far between. Police therefore tracked down every owner of a freezer within a 30-mile radius and interviewed them. Every single one of them seemed to have a rock-solid alibi. So the parameters of the inquiry were wide to include people who'd worked with freezers and refrigeration units, including ice cream vans and drivers of refrigerated vehicles. Again, all those living in a 30-mile radius were tracked down, interviewed, and eliminated. All but one, that is. The one exception was a refrigeration engineer named Albert Breckman, who'd gone missing shortly after Ann had disappeared. Local inquiries failed to locate him, and national inquiries failed to locate him, and so Interpol was contacted. By June 1958, Mr. Breckman was shocked to see his name in a Belgian newspaper stating the police was looking for him in connection with Ann Noblet's murder. So he handed himself in to the Belgian police and was returned to England on Friday, the 13th of June, 1958. Hertfordshire police held a 5-hour in-depth interview with Mr. Breckman. He claimed there had been nothing suspicious about his so-called disappearance after the murder. It was simply an unfortunate coincidence that he accepted a better-paid job in Belgium. He was able to fully and satisfactorily account for his movements on the night of Ann's disappearance, and so he was released without a charge. Well, while conducting their inquiries, the executive of a local freezer company informed the police that a person wouldn't have to actually own or have access to a freezer to have kept her body frozen. Somebody bought a largest quantity of dry carbon dioxide and put it on a bed and laid her body on top of the dry carbon dioxide and tightly pulled the bed sheet over the body. This would have been sufficient insulation to have kept the body frozen. Well, this news boggled the minds of the police and opened up an entirely new line of inquiry. And like all the others, this led to an investigative dead end. Well, there was only one other possible line of inquiry open to the investigators. Since her disappearance, her parents had been plagued by a series of malicious phone calls. There was a chance, although a very small chance, that a malicious phone caller could have been the killer mocking the Noblet family. And then the Simmons family began to get the threatening phone calls. Hugh Simmons answered the telephone one evening, and a male voice on the other end of the line said, "Was that your son who found the body in the woods in Whitewell?" When Hugh Simmons said it was, the voice on the other end said, "Tell him we'll get over to him on Wednesday night." Well, Hugh Simmons was so scared for his son's safety, he sat up all night with a loaded shotgun. Well, the police were able to trace all the calls to a specific telephone box. And he put a plainclothes officer at a discreet distance from the box, and when one of the malicious calls was placed, the officer immediately was notified, and he arrested the man making the call. Crank caller turned out to be a 25-year-old local man by the name of Walter Edmund Nunn. He was interviewed by the police, but it was quite clear he had nothing to do with Ann's murder. He was just a sick-minded individual who had enjoyed tormenting Ann's grieving parents. Well, Nunn appeared before Hertfordshire Magistrates Court in March of 1958 and was given a 6-month imprisonment. Well, the inquest into Ann's death opened on Monday, the 10th of February, 1958. Witnesses called were Dr. Camps, who read out the findings of the autopsy. Detective Chief Superintendent Ewell and Detective Superintendent Richard Lewis both told the coroner's jury what progress had been made in the investigation. D.S. Lewis informed the jury that so far 2,000 people had been interviewed, and police were attempting to track down the owner for suspicious motor vehicles seen in the area. And Hugh Noblet gave evidence that his daughter had no boyfriends and had no cares or worries whatsoever. So at the end of this emotional hearing, the jury retired and came back with a verdict of willful murder by person or persons unknown. Well, the case had hit an investigative dead end. Detective Superintendent Richard Lewis returned to Scotland Yard, leaving the case unsolved. DCL Elwell tried to remain positive and told the press he may think he's committed the perfect crime, but will never arrest till he's caught. Well, despite DCS Elwell's best intentions and efforts, there was no further progress made until 1960. This was when the Birmingham Post newspaper received an anonymous telephone call from a man who confessed to murdering Ann and 29-year-old Stephanie Baird. Stephanie had been brutally murdered at the YWCA hostel in Birmingham on Wednesday, the 23rd of December in 1959. Police duly investigated the possible connection between the two cases. Investigating officers could find not one solitary link to connect the two. They were very different murders. Stephanie was a lot older than Ann, and while Stephanie had been strangled, she had also been stabbed and decapitated. Stephanie's killer had also left a note at the scene that indicated this was the first time he had killed. The call was confirmed to be the ravings of another delusional crank when a 20-year-old Irish laborer named Patrick Joseph Byrne was arrested and convicted of Stephanie's murder a few weeks later. Later proving that Byrne had a cast-iron alibi for the night of Ann's murder. Well, Ann's murder remained unsolved 62 years. And actually, there's little hope it's going to be solved now. No physical evidence survives from the original investigation. No chance of police recovering DNA or any other forensic evidence that might catch the now geriatric killer. Despite it being a headline-grabbing event that had gripped and enthralled the nation for several months at the time, the case is now not remembered by many folks. I just happen to have a professor in my first degree who was into historical murders. According to David Keene, one of the last surviving volunteer searchers, the case just faded. That's what he told the BBC in 2017. But the Noblet family can never forget their slain sister. Ann's little brother Hugh Noblet Jr. told Hertz Advertiser in 2017, Ann was a much-loved, gentle, and caring sister, and no day passes without me thinking of her and the tragic circumstances and the mystery surrounding her death. Well, it'd be nice if the case had a wider renown. There's a lot of outstanding questions surrounding that case that make it so infuriating and intriguing. First question, of course, is why was the body frozen? Did they try to confuse the police as to the time of death? Was it to stop decomposition while the killer waited for an opportunity to dispose of the body? And frankly, why didn't the killer get rid of her corpse right away? And where was the body frozen? And frankly, how was the body frozen? And why was she killed? Was the motive just sex? Did she know the killer? Everybody who knew Ann said she wouldn't go off with a stranger. So you have to ask yourself, was she lured to her death by somebody she knew and trusted? Somebody who had a car? Somebody who knew her routine and patiently awaited for her on that dark country lane she had to walk up to reach her home? And these are the questions that, frankly, need to be answered. Well, from the murder of the girl in the freezer, let's talk about the mystery of 641 Mural Court, the Sims family slaying. According to Leon County Sheriff Mike Wood, this took place in the Tallahassee area. Woke up one morning and all of a sudden we're in an evil world. Now, the Sims were an ordinary American middle-class family living in a quiet, low-crime suburb of Tallahassee, Florida. Originally from the town of Meridian in Mississippi, the Sims moved their young family to Tallahassee in 1962. By 1966, 42-year-old Dr. Robert Wilson Sims was the director of data processing for the Florida Department of Education. He was one of the early computer scientists, revolutionizing the Florida Department of Education by computerizing it and described as a prototype Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. And like many Americans of the time, the Sims were a God-fearing, church-going family, and 34-year-old Helen Sims was the former secretary of the Tallahassee First Baptist Church and the church's organist. Helen recently resigned from her job at the church as she felt the pastor was a bit too flamboyant and overly familiar with female parishioners. And Robert and Helen had 3 daughters, 17-year-old Jenny, 15-year-old Judith Ann, and 12-year-old Joy. Everybody agreed that the Sims children had inherited their mother's good looks and their father's intelligence. Jenny and Judith Ann were both National Honor Roll Society students, and Jenny looked set to joining her sisters in this organization. Saturday, the 22nd of October, 1966, Jenny and Judith Ann both spent that evening babysitting for different neighbors who'd gone to see the Florida State versus Mississippi State football game. Joy had been asked to go skating that night by her friend Pam Bolin and then stay the night at the Bolins' home. Robert and Helen told Joy she couldn't go because the family had to be up early the next morning to attend church. In those days, church was a major part of every family's activities. But Jenny returned home to 641 Mural Court at about 11:15 in the evening. Found the family home eerily still, only the noise of television cut through the quiet. Wondering where her family was, she entered her parents' bedroom. Eyes immediately fell on Dr. Sims, and lay on the bed fully clothed but blindfolded and bound at the wrists and ankles with items of clothing. Been shot once in the head. Helen Sims lay on the floor, like Robert, fully clothed but bound and blindfolded. She'd been shot twice in the head and once in the leg, but by some miracle she was still alive. Joy lay at an angle to her mother so that her bodies formed a V shape on the floor. Joy was dressed for bed, but her top had been pulled up and her night bottoms pulled down. She'd been shot in the head and stabbed 6 times in the abdomen. Killer had also delivered a devastating punch to Joy's chin that left a vivid bruise. Well, of course, Jenny ran to the telephone and called the Beavis Sutherland Funeral Home. Macabrely, before the days of 911, local funeral homes acted as emergency first responders. The Beavers operated the local ambulance service. Jenny's whole body was shaking with shock and fear. She pleaded in the telephone, "Something terrible has happened. Please come." Russell Beavis' 16-year-old son, Rocky, rushed to the 641 Mural Court. They untied the trio in order to see if they could provide medical help and then telephoned the Tallahassee Police Department. Detective Larry Campbell and Sergeant E.C. Cooper Donnelly were the first officers to arrive at the scene. Initially, Campbell and Donnelly were bizarrely informed they were attending a car crash with a single fatality. When they got at the scene and realized the truth, they contacted the chief of police, Frank Stoudemire, and told him he needed to get to 641 Mural Court immediately. Stoudemire would go on record as saying the Sims murder was the worst crime I ever seen in 28 years of law enforcement. Well, right from the beginning, there were 2 major problems with the investigation. There were 2 separate law enforcement agencies claiming jurisdiction over the case. And this was 1960, and the various law enforcement agencies did not secure the crime scene correctly. Dozens of people entered and left the scene with scant regard to preserving forensic evidence. And that just didn't include law enforcement professionals. It included neighbors and morbid locals who wanted to come gape at the crime scene. even alleged that several of those people were allowed to take grisly mementos from the crime scene. And there was a blazing, very public argument between the Tallahassee Police Department and the Leon County Sheriff's Department about who had jurisdiction over the case. Officers from both departments filled 641 Mural Court trying to undertake the various standard procedures they each had, got under each other's feet as they went about their business. Eventually, the Leon County Sheriff's Department won the argument and ordered the Tallahassee police officers to leave the crime scene. But that didn't mean the Tallahassee Police Department relinquished their claim over the case. Oh, no. Both the Leon County Sheriff's Department and Tallahassee Police Department ran separate investigations into the Sims murders, refusing to talk to each other and share information as they went along. And that's partly why there's so much conflicting information about the case in the public domain, and probably a large part of the reason why the case was never solved. Well, for several hours, the scene of the crime was unorganized chaos. In fact, according to Rocky Beavis, in a 2015 interview, they went in and made coffee, and it's probably a textbook what you shouldn't do. Law enforcement was absolutely incapable of dealing with it, so they just didn't know how to handle it. Sheriff's Deputy Larry Campbell defended the actions of the Sheriff's Department in not securing the scene and safeguarding forensic leads that may have been present. He said, in those days, we didn't have the scientific capabilities that we do now. Well, Rocky Beavis evidently spent quite some time at 641 Mural Court that night, gave the young man an insight into the crime scene. He said the only way the scene of the murder was staged would lead you to believe it was pretty well thought out. It wasn't something spur of the moment where somebody said, let's go kill these people. It was left with a distinct impression the murder had been carefully plotted and planned. Well, the family had been bound using granny or surgical knots. Not your common, all-guarding way of binding someone. It was a specialist type of knot used in a very limited field, such as postal work and hunting. It can be difficult to untie as it has a tendency to tighten under friction, such as somebody fighting to escape the bindings. And the knife used to enjoy a large hunter's or butcher's knife, and the gun was a .38 caliber. But there were conflicting reports that multiple weapons were used, including a shotgun. And it appears that very little forensic evidence was taken from the scene. The Leon County Sheriff's Department hadn't published any information on any facts of the case over the years, infuriating true crimes writers. We do know that over 1,000 fingerprints were taken from 641 Mural Court, and those have been used over the years to eliminate suspects. Well, Helen Sims was rushed to the scene of horror, from the scene of horror to the hospital, where she fought desperately for her life. The bullet was lodged so far into her brain it couldn't be safely removed, so she was put on life support. She survived for 9 days, but she eventually died without regaining consciousness on Monday, October 31st, 1966. Police couldn't find a motive for the crime. Nothing had been taken from the scene, and none of the victims had been sexually molested. According to Leon County Sheriff William Joyce, not so much as an ashtray had been moved as far as we could tell. Ruled out robbery, ruled out actual robbery and sexual assault. That's from Leon County Sheriff William Joyce in an interview with the Tucson Daily Citizen in the days after the crime. Sims were an ordinary family, no enemies, and no reason for anybody to want any of them dead. Indeed, people admired the Sims in the local community. All the usual motives were checked, and the family had no money worries, and there was no question of sexual impropriety on either Robert or Helen's behalf, and nobody in the family was into drugs, gambling, any criminality. Absolutely nothing. For all intents and purposes, they were a family of church-going, honest, blameless people. According to the sheriff, these are highly respected people. They're just not any finer people in town. That's according to Leon County Sheriff's Deputy William Smith. He told the Chicago Tribune in an interview 3 days after the murder. One member of the Sims put it much simpler, more heartfelt. They're the nicest family I ever knew. It appeared that whoever had killed the Sims had been let into 641 Mural Court by one of the Sims, as there was no forced entry. Police canvassed the neighborhood, and one of the Sims' neighbors informed the police they had heard a child scream coming from 641 Mural Court at about 10:45 in the evening. But they had taken it for one of the Sims' children playing and getting up into hijinks. Sims' house backed into a wooded ravine that contained a pond and some banana trees, and the pond and woodland ravine were searched to see if either of the murder weapons could be found. But, unfortunately, the area appeared to be free of any forensic evidence. And the Sims friends were all interviewed in quite some depth, but nothing of any evidential value was ascertained from the interviews. Sims' piano tuner, maid, and 3 business associates of Dr. Sims recently visited the family home and were all tracked down and interviewed. They all had solid alibis and nothing helpful to add to the investigation. One possible clue came about thanks to the unreliability of old technology. If you're old enough to remember the old system of analog telephone exchanges, you might remember occasionally you would pick up the phone and be able to hear somebody else's conversation. That used to be quite interesting in my grandmother's party line. Found out a lot of things I didn't know about the neighbors. These cross line, or sometimes erroneously referred to as a party line, can be great fun if you're nosy or bored and lucky enough to get one. Well, just as a serendipitous occurrence happened to one of the Sims neighbors the day after the murder. They picked up the telephone, heard a man they assumed, judging by his voice, to be in his early 20s, talking to an older woman. Snippet of conversation the neighbor heard said to mother, "I've just done a terrible thing. I've killed 3 people. The male on the end of the cross line is then alleged to have recounted details about the murder, which would never be made public by law enforcement officials. The neighbor went straight to the sheriff's department, able to partially trace the connection. They discovered the call to the neighbor had been listening in on that made 300 miles away in Brevard County and could have come from one of 200 phone lines in the area. So that clue fizzled out almost immediately. It became clear the police investigation was in dire straits when patrons of the local library who had borrowed Truman Capote's true crime masterpiece in cold blood were tracked down and interviewed to see if any of them had been inspired by the book to commit a murder of their own. This crazy investigative attitude came to naught as every single true crime fan who'd borrowed the book in Tallahassee had a rock-solid alibi for the night of the murder. This avenue of investigation smacked of desperation, and as Rocky Beavis will later say, in a matter of just a few days it became quite apparent they didn't have any idea what had happened or who might have done it. One person briefly considered a possible suspect was the Sims pastor and Helen's former boss, Pastor Cesar Albert Roberts. C.A., as he was known to his parishioners, was young and had movie star good looks. Won both the Tallahassee Man of the Year Award and the Florida Man of the Year Award, and an outstanding public speaker who was said to have a messianic-like quality that could spellbind an audience. Said that town people of Tallahassee were in absolute awe of C.A. In fact, it was said a certain clique of his parishioners are quite cult-like in their devotion. Well, Helen had resigned from her role as C.A.'s secretary just 3 days before her death. Now, he had a roving eye to go with his sentimental idol good looks, and it was rumored he had seduced several of his parishioners. When C.A. was officiating at Helen's memorial service, he referred to in very familiar terms, using her Christian name instead of her surname. And, of course, old wives will have tongues that wag, and the gossip got back to the ears of the Tallahassee Police Department. They were bound to investigate. A ultraviolet, or blacklight, was passed over his office, and lo and behold, glory be, it was awash with semen stains. So the question became, had the messianic pastor and Helen been having an affair? And she called it off, and this caused good old C.A. to go into a rage and murder his former lover and her family. Or she'd seen too much when she was C.A.'s secretary. Was the pastor scared that now Helen was leaving his employ, she might tell the world about his sins? Well, it turns out he had a rock-solid alibi for the night of the murders. He'd been in Chaplin officiating at a local football game, and he'd been caught on local TV multiple times cheering the local team on. And that didn't stop the rumors about his alleged involvement from swirling around Tallahassee and in the internet for many, many years after the murders. Over the years, people have been questioning if the killer could have been one of C.A.'s lovers, jealous of how close Helen was to the pastor. Some have even suggested C.A. could have ordered one of his cult-like followers to murder the Sims for him. No evidence to prove any of these theories, and the rumors and innuendos ruined his career, and he was forced to leave Tallahassee under an unnecessary cloud. Now, there were 2 other suspects that the police believed he considered at the time of the murders. Vernon B. Fox Jr. and Mary Charles La Jolla. This particular courting couple came to the police's attention because La Jolla kept contacting Sheriff Joyce asking for information about the case and seen loitering around the crime scene. Local gossip said the couple were a pair of local weirdos obsessed with death. And she'd been banned from the Beavis funeral home because what Russell Beavis, at first took to be an interest in becoming an undertaker, was turning into an unnatural obsession with death and the dead bodies he kept on the premises. Well, after Russell Beavis banned the young lady from the premises, she took to breaking into the funeral home after dark. Things came to a head when Russell Beavis discovered that she'd been broken into the funeral home one night, donned a funeral shroud, and fallen asleep in one of the empty caskets. Well, neither set of parents approved of the relationship that La Jolla and Fox had, as both sets of parents thought the other child was weird and was encouraging the apple their eye to act stranger and stranger. So the couple had taken a sneaking around, hiding their relationship from their parents in a particularly ghoulish 20th century version of Romeo and Juliet. Well, the sheriff's department decided to pay the odd couple a little bit of closer attention, and La Jolla was 19 and daughter of a janitor from Florida State University. She was adopted, and she claimed her adopted parents were physically and emotionally abusive, described her home life as beatings and beatings and beatings and beatings. Vernon Fox Jr. was 20 years old and the son of Dr. Vernon Fox, a famous criminologist who lectured at Florida State University and was assistant ward and prison psychiatrist for Michigan State University. But despite his prominent position, both academically within the criminal justice system, he was a womanizing and abusive alcoholic who had subjected his son to years of physical and emotional abuse. And as a result of this abuse, Fox Jr. developed mental health problems, had a history of mental instability. In June of 1966, he'd been dishonorably discharged from the American Air Force because of his unsteady personality. Well, Fox in particular appeared eager to clear his name and offered to undertake a polygraph test. He failed, which renewed police interest in him. But then it came to light that there could have been two legitimate reasons for his failure. First, some of the baseline questions were related to criminal activities, and he'd committed several acts of petty theft and peeping Tom activity that he hadn't been caught for. He lied when answering those baseline questions, skewering the test results. And Mary Charles La Jolla approached Sheriff Joyce and told him she and Fox had gone to be married and since divorced. Recently, she had been having strange dreams about the Sims murder, and she wondered if it could be useful to the investigation. So she was re-interviewed over a period of 6 grueling hours and stated in her dream her boyfriend, Vernon Fox, called her over to 641 Mural Court on the night of the murders. She said Vernon was in trouble, some kind of damn trouble, and I was going to lose the only friend I had. He killed the parents, and I went in there and looked at that body. My God, that kid with her clothes off lying on the floor. How could he be turned on with something like that? How could he be interested in that ugly little girl? She went on to tell the police in the dream she'd watched Vernon Fox molest Joy's body for an hour or so before she cleaned up the crime scene, obliterating any evidence of their involvement, and then they'd left. She asserted in the dream Vernon committed the murders to F his daddy over and impress her. They asked the sheriff what would happen to her if it'd been more than a dream. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back and talk more about unsolved murders in later shows. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.